Protesters took to the streets of New York and other cities last night after the grand jury decided not to indict the police officer in the choking death of Eric Garner. So what evidence did the grand jury hear that the protesters have not heard? Joining us is Mo Ivory. She's attorney and radio personality, and Daniel Bongino. He's a former NYPD police officer and former Secret Service agent. Also, Dan's brother currently serves in the Secret Service. It's great to have both of you with us this morning. Dan, I want to start with you. You were on the NYPD. What do you think of this Staten Island grand jury coming back with no indictment?
Yeah, I think the lack of an indictment surprised everyone, the families and some of the police officers in New York I spoke to as well. I think they expected an indictment to come down in the case given the video evidence and accounts. But we don't know what happened inside the grand jury proceeding. The officer's testimony may have been very persuasive, so we just don't know what happened.
We know a little bit of what happened. Now, you're right, Dan, that it hasn't been released. There has not been the transparency that we saw in Ferguson. No transcript of the officer's testimony has been released. However, his attorney did speak to the New York Times, and so we can glean a little bit of what was said. Here is what Officer Pantaleo told the grand jury. Officer Pantaleo told jurors he continued to hold on to Mr. Garner as he struggled to regain his balance. He says he wanted to make sure that Mr. Garner was not injured by other officers rushing in, as well as to prevent Mr. Garner from possibly biting one of them. Mo, the grand jurors believed that defense.
Well, at least 12 of them did, and so there were 23 grand jurors. So, I really would be so curious to know what those conversations were about, because that explanation to me sounds ludicrous. All of a sudden now you're worried about somebody biting a man that 5 people had to jump on top of to bring to the ground. Now all of a sudden he's saying his mind switched and his concern was to make sure Mr. Garner wasn't hurt and to make sure that he didn't all of a sudden start biting other police officers. It doesn't even sound logical.
Dan, one of the other things that Officer Pantaleo apparently told the grand jury, according to his attorney, is that part of the reason he kept his arm around Mr. Garner's neck was that he was up against a plate glass storefront window behind him, and he was afraid that they were both going to come crashing through the window, so he kept him to try to take him down to the ground. Again, Dan, you were an NYPD officer. Is that chokehold legit? Were you trained to do that in a situation like the one they confronted Eric Garner?
Well, the NYPD does not train any type of chokehold, and it's important that your audience understand that there are 3 different kinds of, I guess, what we would call chokeholds. You have a basic, what you'd call like a headlock, which is just a restraint. School kids do it all the time. Then you have a tracheal choke, which is absolutely banned. It's considered deadly force, where the bone of the arm is placed up against the windpipe, which can kill you very quickly. And then third, importantly, you have a carotid choke, the carotid arteries, which restrains blood flow to the head and causes temporary unconsciousness.
And which one is this one? When you watch that video, which is this that we're seeing?
Right. Well, that's important. That's why I brought it up. Initially, it looks like what he's trying to do, and I can't get in the officer's head here, is not, it looks like he's trying to actually take him down, and it looks like on the ground, if you watch the video, it turns into what it looks to be some kind of carotid choke. Maybe he did it out of panic. I don't know. I wasn't in his head, but it doesn't look initially like it's anything other than a takedown attempt.
Go ahead, Mo.
Allison, I was going to say that, the problem is that we're talking about judgment here, right? And if you look at that video, you can easily realize that this officer jumped on Mr. Garner's back, probably in his mind, said, okay, enough is enough. Let's take this guy in. I'm jumping on his back. It's so obvious that at that moment he went into sort of a combat mode, and then everybody jumped in. Okay, so let's suppose that, in fact, he was afraid or he was trying to, I do not think that Mr. Garner was resisting arrest, but let's act as if the officers thought that. At the moment that there were 4 or 5 people on top of him and he was saying he couldn't breathe, he's a large man, he's now down on the ground, everybody couldn't have eased up a little bit, given him some space to breathe, got up off of him. What was he going to be able to do laying flat on the ground to 5 or 6 or 7 officers on the scene?
And Mo,
it's just so excessive.
Mo, you say that you don't believe that he was resisting arrest, yet the video does show he was non-compliant. He was saying, no, guys, come on, guys, no. He was backing away.
Yes, Allison, there is a difference between conversation and frustration versus not resisting arrest. What Eric Garner was saying to that officer was, come on, guys, I'm tired of this. You come here, you harass me every day. He had his hands up. There was nothing that he wasn't fighting the officers. He wasn't flailing. He wasn't doing any of that. And the narrative that he was resisting arrest has continued to be built on him. Well, you know, if he had just gone with the officers, he was trying to talk to the officer and say, look, man, why are you doing this to me? I'm frustrated by you continuing to harass me. And he had his hands up. So I'm tired of that narrative that, well, this would have never happened to him if he had just complied with the officer. It would have never happened to him if that officer didn't jump on his back and smush his head into the ground to the point where he was asphyxiated.
Mo, we hear your frustration. We have to leave it there. Dan, thanks so much for all of your expertise and helping us walk through that video. It's great to talk to both of you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.